Hi, my name is EJ Massa. If you know me, you know that I love booze, and I'd do anything to get some. And I mean anything. Oh, I'm sorry, skeleton cat. You see, he used to be a regular skeleton. Now he's a skeleton cat. I did that. Mead is one of the oldest beverages. You know, Vikings a long time ago, they left water and honey out for a long time, and then some genius decided, hey, you know what? I'm gonna drink that old honey water. And he actually was a genius because that honey water became booze. By Odin's beard, they said. This is delicious mead. And then he sacked England. That's exactly how it happened. This is our history. Now, I'm gonna make some mead happen.
To start, I use this sanitizing liquid to sanitize all the tools I'm using today.
You want to make sure you don't introduce any bugs or bacteria that will ruin your brew. Everything you own is disgusting, and so are you. Make sure you sanitize.
So I diluted this with water as directed and sanitized all my equipment in a big bucket.
The first thing we need is honey, and you know what they say? The finer the ingredients, the finer the brew.
That's why I'm using cheap store brand honey. Because I'm cheap.
Look, this is my first time making this. I'd love to use expensive local raw honey, and I'm sure it'd make a better product. But that's an experiment for another time. Also, I'm cheap.
So store brand honey it is then. I'll weigh 3 pounds out using my handy kitchen scale. And actually I should have measured this out directly in the 1 gallon jug because now I have to awkwardly transfer it with this funnel. Slowly. Well, next time. There, 3 pounds of honey in a jug. For yeast, I have this Red Star Premier Blanc yeast packet, which I'm using because it came free with the jug, which is as good as reason as any, I suppose. A whole packet's good for 5 gallons, I believe. I'm using half this packet and hydrating it in a little shot glass of water, just to wake it up a little.
The yeast will eat the sugar and then produce alcohol. I love you, yeast. Now, one thing I want to do, and I got the idea from a YouTube channel called City Steading Brews, is to make a tea to mix in there. What will this tea do? Well, it'll add some complexity to the brew. You always hear wine snobs talking about tannins and so forth. Basically, the goal is to make a complex mead rather than a thin one.
Like that Instant Pot wine I made a while back, which was super thin and didn't really have a good body to it. So for this tea, I'm taking half an orange and taking the peel for its zest. Then I'm taking some raisins. It's important to make sure there's no other ingredients in these raisins besides, well, raisins. Took a handful of those, lightly chopped them up. This is so the yeast has access to those nutrients in the raisins, since I won't be adding an additional yeast nutrient. I'll add that orange zest to over 2 cups of water, along with a tea bag of PG Tips, which claims to be England's #1 tea. I doubt it. Hey, England, comment below if this is your #1 tea. Add the raisins and brought it to a boil. Turned off the heat and let it steep for 15 minutes. Then I filtered that through a tea strainer and let it cool down a tad.
You don't want it too hot because yeast begins to die at 120 degrees Fahrenheit. And you don't want to kill the yeast like I've killed my chances of having any success in this life.
I took my jug of honey and filled it halfway with delicious spring water. If you use tap water, make sure it's not chlorinated because that tastes awful and it could stress out your yeast. I shook it a bit and then added the tannin tea. Shook it some more. It's important all the honey on the bottom dissolves. Then I added my yeast water, shook it some more, filled it up with more spring water, shook it some more. There. Now I think it's ready. But before I leave it to ferment, I'm going to take a specific gravity reading by placing some of that liquid into a graduated cylinder.
A specific gravity reading will tell us how much sugar is in the liquid, and that will tell us roughly how much potential alcohol will be in the final brew. All honey is different, all bees are different, so we can't really be too sure exactly how much sugar a pound of honey will add to the liquid. So it's always good to measure the specific gravity.
I'm going to use a hydrometer to take a reading on this must, and I got a reading of 1.112, which could give me about 14.7% alcohol if this goes dry. The yeast I'm using I think has a tolerance of around 14% alcohol. So that's perfect. I'll pour that back in, and then I'll put an airlock filled with the sanitation liquid so air can come out, but no bugs can come in. And there we go. This went into my basement's fermentation corner, and I'll check back on it in a few weeks to a month. One tip I'll give you, and this helps me with both brewing and grilling experiments, is to keep a journal and take detailed notes of everything you did and when. It really helps months later when you're trying to figure out what the hell it is you did. After exactly a month, I decided it was time to rack it. Couldn't wait any longer, and frankly, I'm not sure how the Vikings did it either. Must have been really busy pillaging and such. What racking does is take the liquid off all the dead yeast and particles that float to the bottom, which is called lees. But first I'm going to take a final gravity reading to see how much alcohol we gain. I'm getting a reading of 0.998, so that's very dry.
So if we take the original gravity, subtract the final gravity, and then multiply it by 131.25, we should get the percent alcohol in this brew, which I have calculated to be 14.96%, which is not too shabby at all. And again, it's always good to take gravity readings to tell what your brew is doing.
And I'll set some of this aside for me to taste in a minute. Using a tool called an auto siphon, I'll put one end of the tube in this jar, and then pump the auto siphon halfway up the jug as to not disturb the lees. Then gently bring it to the bottom and presto! The siphon does a great job of transferring liquid to this jar without disturbing all the nasty tasting lees that's left behind in the jug.
You could pour the liquid carefully to another jar, but you'll risk agitating the lees, and adding more lees to it than you'd want, and also oxygenating it, which could ruin your brew.
Now that it's in this jar, I'm going to put a spoon in it and degas it a tiny bit by stirring. Sometimes gas is trapped in the liquid during the alcohol producing process, and we want to agitate it out of there. But it seems like this is fairly gasless as is. At last, most importantly, the taste test.
So here's my first crack at Mead. First, let's take a sniff. There is a little bit of a sweetness to the smell, like a buttery, sweet smell of honey and alcohol. Alcohol, definitely alcohol. Let me just have a little taste. Oh, that's really nice. It's definitely has a little bit of I wouldn't say a flat beer taste, but yeah, maybe like a flat ale. I've had beers that taste like this, and I like it. I like it a lot. This tastes really, really good. Well, I guess I'm going to be making mead from now on. I like that a lot. Wow. Yeah, it's light. It's got a little bit of a crispness to it. It doesn't especially taste like honey. It's very refreshing as is. And I'm really happy with how this turned out for my first mead. This is fantastic. It's not flat either. Maybe it was the tea that I made that helped get that complexity in, but it's not flat at all. It's not too boozy. You can taste kind of the citrus notes in it. I'm so shocked. I'm going to be making this all the time.
Originally, I was going to let this go another bit in secondary fermentation, but since this turned out so well, I think I'll just cold crash it for a few days. Basically, put it in the fridge. So the yeast can settle out, and then I'll finish it off by bottling it, which is very similar to the racking process. I got a few swing top bottles here. I got them super cheap from TJ Maxx. This first bottle here, I'm going to try to age it a bit, and I'll make an update video about how it tastes after aging. And these two bottles, well, I'm going to drink these right the hell now. You can't stop me. This is a relatively dry honey wine, and that's how I like it. You can back sweeten with more honey if you prefer a sweeter beverage. So if you liked this episode, it's about booze and stuff, me making booze. If you like that, comment below and tell me, hey, I want more of that booze stuff. Or tell me, get back on the grill. Get back on the grill, you. Anyway, that's it for now. Until next time, bye.